Hello, everyone. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Welcome to our webinar, everyone. My name is Justin D'Souza. I'm a quantitative specialist here at Statistics Solutions. During today's webinar, we are going to discuss preparation for a quantitative defense. My colleague Sierra is also joining us today, and she will be providing hyperlinks in the chat box for self-scheduling an appointment and providing some hyperlinks with the webinars that we'll be doing in the future. If you have any questions, you can type those into the chat box or the Q&A box. And at the end of the webinar, I will be doing a question and answer session. So let's go ahead and dive in. And we will be sending everyone a copy of the webinar as well as a copy of the PowerPoint. So we'll start out by giving a brief overview of the services that our company provides. Then we'll dive into today's topic about defense preparation for quantitative methods. We'll conclude with a summary and a Q&A session. Our company, Statistics Solutions, provides assistance with every part of the dissertation journey. I do see some participants in here that I've worked with before, so I'm glad to see that some participants are returning for the drop-in sessions that we're doing. We do multiple sessions a month, so I would highly recommend checking them out. So we do assist with topic development all the way through the end of the dissertation journey. We have quantitative and qualitative specialists as well as literature review specialists. So we can help you with the proposal chapters, which usually involves the introduction, the literature review, and the methodology. We do cover quantitative and qualitative individually, but also if you're doing a mixed method study, we can provide assistance there. We help with IRB forms. We provide data entry templates. We have a SurveyMonkey account in which we can help host a survey for you. And then once you get to the final stretch, we help with the results chapters, both quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods, the discussion piece, PowerPoint for proposal and final defenses. And once you've completed your dissertation, maybe you want to condense it and turn it into a journal publication, we can help you do that as well. So if you have any questions about the assistance we provide, you can call us at 727-442-4290. Here we have a couple hyperlinks to view the past webinars that we've done in the webinar archive link here. And then you can see what is upcoming in the horizon with the webinars. The future link is at the top here. Okay, so in regards to the proposal and the final defenses, it's really university specific. Some colleges will only do a final defense, but I think most do a proposal and a final defense. Proposal defense usually involves the first 3 chapters, which are the introduction, the literature review, and the methodology. Some universities do it by section, so you'll only have the introduction and lit review might be condensed into one section, and then the methodology is its own chapter. The proposal defense is usually written in future tense. It's assuming you haven't collected the data yet. So it's a lot of saying you will be collecting data this way, you will be analyzing the data this way. It's talking about hypothetically what you're going to do. So it's really summarizing the key points from these three chapters. And the primary focus needs to be on identifying a gap in the literature. Why does this study need to be conducted? And then explaining the methodology for your proposed study. When you get to the final defense, you are taking a lot of information from your proposal defense, but you're condensing it, and you're then adding the results and discussion piece. So really the focus of this final defense is on the results. What do these statistical analyses show for your study? And what are the implications of those findings? How does it contribute to your field? And what recommendations can you provide for future research? So once you get to the final defense, a lot of the information from the proposal defense is retained, but you have to shift it to past tense because the study has been conducted at this point. In regards to preparation, it's important to ask your school for templates. Every school has a template for the defense presentations. If you can't find it on your school website, try asking your chair, maybe your methodologist, and they can provide a template for you. Most schools also have a minimum or maximum slide count, and most presentations have a time limit. You don't want it to exceed 30 minutes, I would say. Most of the presentations that I've worked with hover around 20 to 25 minutes, and the slide count doesn't tend to go beyond 30 slides. So try to condense the information as much as you can within 30 minutes and fewer than 30 slides, if possible. You can also request for approved examples from your committee. So every committee has worked with prior students, and they have prior students have defended with that committee and they've been approved. It's really important to ask for previous examples so you can get an idea of what your committee is looking for. And then even prior to your defense, you can do a mock defense, maybe with your chair, or you can shoot them an email beforehand and ask them what kinds of questions can you anticipate during the presentation. And usually at the end of the presentation, there is a question session that your committee will ask you questions. So it's a good idea to have some preparation, have an idea of what questions they may throw at you. It's not usually a curveball question. You know, they don't try to trip you up. This is just a rite of passage. Many students get nervous before this presentation, and that's completely natural. But the point of it is not to trip you up. It's just to see if you can understand your findings and if you can convey it to the committee. So this is the general template I see for a final defense. So you have the introduction information. I can't speak too much to this as it's a little bit out of my expertise. This is more literature foundation. But you start with the problem statement and the purpose statement. Why does this study need to be conducted? You provide your theoretical foundation and the gap in the literature. Then you dive into some methodological specific components like the population and the sample. What is the estimated population that you're targeting? Do you have any inclusion or exclusion criteria? And you also will provide a sample size estimate. When you do quantitative studies, you usually need to run a power analysis, which will determine the minimum sample size that you need to target for your research. It's a good idea to provide that sample size estimate in the presentation. Then you jump into research methods and designs. A really good recommendation I can provide is doing flashcards. A lot of the methodology comes down to knowing definitions of terms. Why did you select a quantitative study versus a qualitative study? Why did you select a correlational design versus a experimental design? Having definitions ready will help you during the defense, as you can provide a justification and a reason for why you made these decisions. Then you jump into research questions and hypotheses. And usually you need to have hypotheses that accompany a inferential research question. Is there is there a statistically significant relationship between variables? Then you'll have a null hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis for each question. Then you go into data collection procedures. And think of this section as a recipe, from step A to step Z. What permissions do you need before you start collecting data? What surveys are you administering? Are you giving a demographic questionnaire? What permissions did you need for the instruments themselves? Are the instruments a public database, or are they something that is privately owned and you need permission to use it? And then you dive into the actual data collection. Are you using a website like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics? Are you keeping the data de-identified, making sure that there are no names, email addresses, phone numbers that are collected? And then talking about what software you're going to use to crunch numbers, SPSS, data, R, SAS. That all goes under data collection. That's probably the most detailed section in the proposal defense. And then during the final defense, it's shifted to past tense, and it should be condensed. The data analysis process, this is where you'll talk about extracting the data, whether it's through SurveyMonkey or if you're doing surveys in person, extracting the data, putting it into your software, and then what are the steps you're doing to clean the data, making sure that there are no missing responses, replacing missing responses through imputation or substitution, running descriptives on your demographics so you can see how many males and females there are, what is the distribution by ethnicity. Then you go into each research question. To address research question 1, we're going to run a regression. We're going to run a correlation or an ANOVA. You go through each research question. You talk about the assumptions that are going to be checked. You usually have to check for things like normality, homoscedasticity, multicollinearity, things like that. And then you report your results. And when you get to the final defense, the research results are probably the biggest section, where you go research question by research question, you report the findings, and you identify if you reject or fail to reject your null hypothesis. And then you dive into implications of your findings for other research and a conclusion. And then in this section, you can also provide recommendations for future research. Okay, as far as preparation, this is also preparation. You will want to know if you're doing the defense over the computer, virtually, or are you going in person? I think it gives you a great advantage to do it through a Zoom meeting virtually, because you can print out your entire dissertation, have it right next to you. You can highlight key sections and talking points that you want to discuss during the defense. The only thing is, the big limitation is you can't account for internet problems and things like that. So you want to test out the logistics of the software before actually doing the defense. So I would do a mock defense with a friend or a family member. Ideally, do a mock defense with your committee, with your chair, if that's possible. If you're presenting in person, then this is the traditional, the classic way. You have to familiarize yourself with the equipment that you're going to be using, as there can be a lot that's going on. You might have a projector, or you have to use a USB or HDMI connection, and you'll be using PowerPoint most likely. So yeah, I don't see in-person defenses as much, especially in the last few years, but some colleges still do them. Okay, so I do have a sample quantitative defense here that I'll pull up. It's final defense example. So this is just an example of a final defense, and it kind of follows the same section headings that I provided in the PowerPoint. You can see you start out with an overview, you go into your problem statement, then you go into your purpose statement, then you go into the theoretical foundation, and also you can write talking points at the bottom of these slides. So it can give you an idea of what to talk about during the defense after you go through the bullet points. Purpose statement, theoretical foundation. Provide a visual here if you can of your theoretical model. Then you go into population. Okay, this person provided population, the actual number. That's really good if you have that information. Then you go into the sample. So the sample consists of how many employees that have the specific criteria, and then they provided the power analysis findings. Okay, so we can see we need to target a minimum of 84 people. That's essentially what this found. Then research methods and designs. As you can see, there's not a lot of talking, or there's not a lot of bullet points under here. It just has keywords, which is good. You want to try and avoid putting a ton of text in the slides. So you have the 3 key components here for research method and design, and then you can expand on it through talking points. Okay, why did you select the quantitative design versus qualitative? Usually quantitative involves looking at numbers. That's the big thing there. Qualitative is usually running interviews, exploring underlying perceptions of the participants. But if you have an objective questionnaire and you're using Likert scales, like a Likert scale survey, strongly agree to strongly disagree, that is typically quantitative. And then you go into research design, experimental or non-experimental and correlational. Again, flashcards are really good for this type of stuff. Just have a definition on the ready for what these terms mean. Then research questions and hypotheses. You can see the research question listed here. And then the 2 hypotheses, we have the null hypothesis, and then we have the alternative. Usually we try to reject the null in favor of the alternative. Then we go into the data collection process. And this is a slide that during the proposal defense, it might take a few slides. One slide might not cover it, but you want to talk about permissions. I kind of went through this before, but you talk about permissions, and from step A to step Z, how can someone replicate your data collection? That's the type of details you will provide. Talking about consent forms. Participants are allowed to drop off at any time. They're not required to complete it. And talking about the software that you're using, like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or Amazon mTurk, providing an estimation for how long the survey will take to complete. And then what do you do once the data has been extracted? And then we go into the data analyses. We talk about the software that is going to be used, developing composite scores from the Likert scale surveys, looking at frequencies and percentages for demographics, means and standard deviations for numeric variables, checking the assumptions of normality and linearity. I think for this study, the analysis was a regression model. So you need to check for a couple assumptions before you run a regression. And then talking about the specific tests that are being used to check for those assumptions. And then what is the inferential analysis that you're using? And this person was using Spearman correlations. Okay, and then from there, you go into the actual results. We have the demographics listed here. And if you can, just copy and paste entire tables to the defense. I think tables are a really good visual, and then you can use talking points to explain the figures. And more descriptive results. Then the findings of the assumptions, was normality supported or not? What did we do to adjust as normality was not supported? Originally, Pearson correlations were proposed, but because normality was not supported, we shifted to a non-parametric Spearman correlation instead. And then you dive into the results themselves. Okay, and once you go into the results, you can give a definitive statement. This is really important. Do you reject, or do you partially reject, or do you fail to reject your null hypothesis? Then you go into implications of the research. What do these findings mean in the context of your field? And within implications, you can also provide recommendations for future studies. And then you conclude. You provide a summary of the findings and a conclusion. But pretty standard. You can see this one was 21 slides. This is around the average. I do see some presentations that are a bit longer and some that are shorter, but I think this is a nice sweet spot in the middle. About 20 slides should cover everything. So that covers our Intellectus webinar, Statistics Solutions webinar. If you have any questions, you can type those into the chat box, and we will be sending everyone a copy of this webinar in addition to the PowerPoint. Yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and type those in the chat box. As you can see, Sierra has provided some hyperlinks for dissertation resources, the webinar archive, scheduling a free consultation. Hey, thank you, Khalid. I appreciate the feedback. You can see what we have on the horizon for webinars. Hi, Bernicia, good to see you here. Okay, so it looks like the next webinar will be on Tuesday, and this will be regarding qualitative methodologies. So given that this one is quantitative, I don't know how much this applies to most of the participants here, but you can check it out. You know, a lot of the same concepts will carry over from quantitative to qualitative. And then we have an introduction webinar that will be done by my colleague, Tom. So it looks like next week we have a few, and we have a chapter 1 and a chapter 5 webinar. All right, do we have any questions? Hey, Julie, I think Sierra just reposted them. Hyperlinks should be at the bottom of the chat box. Thanks for joining us, Lisa. Glad to hear it was helpful. All right, do we have any questions about it? Doesn't have to pertain to the webinar. If you have questions about what analyses to run, or if you're stuck in a certain part of the methodology, do you have any questions about those? Yes, that is true, Khalid. Some research papers use both quantitative and qualitative. So mixed methods is the best approach for that. And how do you deal with that during the defense? You will want separate sections for the quantitative component and then the qualitative component. Okay, so it follows the same general template that I provided here. Right here, it's going to follow the same, but once you get to bullet point 4 around your population sample, you'll want a separate section for quantitative population and then a separate section for the qualitative. Same idea with the research method and design. You'll want separate sections for quant and qual. You might have a quantitative research question and then a qualitative research question. It's just going to be the same concepts, but it'll be a longer presentation. And yes, hey, Sean, we will be sending everyone a copy of the webinar and the PowerPoint. So yes, you can watch the recording later and it'll be uploaded to YouTube as well. Like Stephanie, I think Sierra just added the links at the bottom. Let me know if you see those. All right, if we don't have any other questions, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Come join us for the future webinars. And if you are stuck in the dissertation and in a certain section, reach out to Janine. Sierra did provide a schedule link, HubSpot link, dissertation consultation for Janine. And she'll go through where you've hit a roadblock, essentially, and identify a time frame and what you're trying to complete. And she'll assign a specialist to you, either a quantitative specialist or a literature review specialist, and we can help guide you in the right direction. So let us know if you have any questions. Thanks for joining and have a great evening.